Hello, I'm Sarah Stead, Deputy Principal, and I will talk you through the presentation that we gave to parents in our second Year 11 Parents Information Evening in early March. The aims of this session are to look at the techniques that we've shared with the students recently in their revision sessions that took place again in early March, and also that what we have been teaching the students over the course of the year in their tutorial sessions. We also will be going over the advice about mental health and wellbeing and ensuring that you are aware of how we have taught the students to prepare for their upcoming exams. We're going to outline what revision can look like in different course subjects and how we can plan revision. Your support for your child in their emotions, time management and goal setting is what's really going to help them. We absolutely value the partnership that we have with you in your child's education, and thank you for coming to this presentation to be here to support them. We talked with the students about the fact that the upcoming exams are almost like the home straight in a long race all the way through their education up until their GCSEs. We talked about how important it is for students for them to be setting themselves up to achieve their personal best, not for anybody else but for themselves, and how we can support them through strategic planning and through ensuring that they have the tools to best look after their mental health during this difficult time. We want the home straight to be as calm and well planned as possible so that they can help themselves to achieve their personal best, but also prevent the inevitable pressure that they will feel from turning into additional stress. So the first section of this presentation is to outline the specific advice and guidance on how to revise in core subjects. We're going to cover English language and literature, maths and science.
Students can often wonder how best to revise for English. This is particularly the case for English language, where although we can predict the sort of questions they'll have to answer, there's no set text and no real content that they have to learn. Students sometimes wonder as well how to balance the demands of the content between English language and English literature. So there are some clear strategies that students can use to help make their revision really effective. The first is to really plan to cover all the range of elements from both the English language and the English literature courses. What we've done here is to give the students an overview of all the different course content that they will need to revise, and we've mapped out how we're revising this in school. Students can use this outline to make sure that they're covering the same content in their own personal revision sessions. It's also a really good idea if students are able to pre-prepare the revision topic in advance of the week that we're covering it in school. So for example, the first week that we come back after Easter, all the classes will be looking at revising language paper 1 section A. So just before we get to that week, it'd be really useful if students could spend some time looking over their book notes and making sure that they're confident with the question formats that they're going to approach in that particular part of the exam paper. For personal revision, it's a really good idea for students to chunk those big blocks up and to keep going back to content. So they might start with some Macbeth revision, then move on to some language paper 2, then some Jekyll and Hyde, and cover bits of those contents before then going back to Macbeth, so that something doesn't get lost if it's being covered right at the start of their revision process. Learning and using terminology is really important for both English language and English literature too. So students will have covered an awful lot of key terminology across the 5 years that they've been with us. And so a lot of the revision will just be building up their confidence with both knowing how to use these words in their own writing and knowing how to find examples within the text that they're reading. In exercise books, students will often have lists of those key terms, and there are lots and lots of different websites as well where those things are accessible. Making flashcards is really useful for these, so students could write down the device on the front of the flashcard and an explanation and an example on the back, quizzing each other, quizzing themselves, making sure that they're happy with what each of those pieces of terminology means. They can then look at some past papers and try to find examples of those things within texts. Once they've found their examples, then asking themselves what the effect of that particular example is. Why do we think the writer has used that particular technique within a text is the key to success at English. So the more they can practice thinking about effect and thinking, why has the writer done this particular thing now, the better their responses will be. As well as being able to find those techniques in different writers' texts, students will also need to be able to create their examples of their own when they're doing their own writing tasks. And those writing tasks are really important in English language. There are 2 writing tasks, each one is worth 40 marks, so together they create half of the English language grade. Students can be asked to write about any topic, and so they can't really pre-plan the content of those tasks. However, what they can do is to learn sentence openings, sentence structures, precise formal vocabulary, and practice developing their detailed reasoning. The more confident they are with those particular skills, the easier they will find developing those arguments within their writing tasks. In this example, students are looking at an argument about PE, but they're practicing developing statistics, presenting their ideas as certainties, including multiple reasons to support their ideas, and using more formal, precise language. So a student could take that same framework, replace the question in the middle, and practice developing those same examples and those same structures based on different topics. For narrative and descriptive writing, planning structures is really useful. So students can take different descriptive writing prompts, different pictures that they find around them as well, and practice planning using the structures that they have learned in class. Planning longer writing tasks is an effective way of revising for English. It allows students to consider the overall structure of their piece of writing, but it can be done in about 10 minutes. It also encourages students to plan, and actually students who plan their writing tend to get better marks because their writing is more thoughtful and more highly crafted. It is, however, still important that students practice writing full responses, both so they can practice developing their detailed ideas, but also so they develop the writing stamina and the physical strength that's needed to keep going for the length of the exams. It's a good idea to practice planning 2 or 3 answers, and then for every 2 or 3 that are planned, to choose the best one and to write it in full as a response. Students can then hand those to their English teachers and get feedback from those. For English literature, it's really important that the students know the text very well. They need to know Jekyll and Hyde, Macbeth, and Inspector Calls, and the 15 poems from the Power and Conflict anthology. Students have got their own annotated copies of those texts, along with knowledge organisers. There are also loads of online resources they can use. There are revision videos, Seneca, and lots of different websites, as well as their class notes and copies of the texts to develop their confidence. They need to make sure for the texts that they know the plot, they know the characters, and they're really confident to be able to talk about those things. Once they have, then they need to start learning key quotations from each text. So the more quotations and the more details a student knows, the easier it is for them to crack the exams. But actually 10 to 12 really good quotations is a starting point for each text. Rather than just learning the quotations in isolation, it's a really good idea to put them into sentences like the ones that are identified on the screen. That helps students to remember what the quotation is about and actually gives them a starting point for writing about those quotations when they're writing their essays. Making flashcards and using strategies such as look, cover, write, check can be a really effective way of learning quotations. As well as knowing quotations, students also need to know how to analyse the quotations and how to use them to support their interpretations of the text. So starting off with single word analysis is a really good starting point for developing clearer explanations. So students will take a quotation, they'll decide on which is the most significant word or words within the quotation and explain why they think the writer has chosen those particular word choices. What are the denotations, the connotations behind that particular word? Students can then work out and look for more advanced techniques. For example, the instance there, we've got imperatives, we've got similes, we've got metaphors in there. And then we can develop and explore the context. We can explore links to other quotations. And finally, think about the writer's universal ideas that might link to that quotation. So practicing analysing quotations is really useful. A more sociable way of doing that is to play games like Just a Minute, where students are encouraged to speak aloud for a whole minute based upon what they know about a particular quotation. So that challenges them then to think about developing their ideas and developing their analysis. Exam questions on Macbeth and Jekyll and Hyde are both based upon extracts. So the exam paper will have extracts from the text printed on it, and students will have to pick out relevant information from the extract, as well as bringing in their wider knowledge of the text. For these 2 texts in particular, it's really important that students get used to reading and annotating text extracts, practicing ignoring some of the information that they don't necessarily understand, and picking out the information that they see as being really important to help them to understand and to answer the question that's set. And again, essay planning is a really effective strategy for our literature essays. Students have got access to a range of past questions. They can choose an essay question, use their notes to help them to plan that question, use revision sites and websites to get additional information to help them. And then again, for every 2 or 3 essays that they've planned, it's a really good idea to choose the best plan and to practice writing it as a full essay. Again, that's really important to help students to develop their ideas in detail, to practice articulating their ideas using really precise language, embedding multiple quotations, and to make sure that they're always considering the writer's universal ideas and intentions. Practicing writing stammer is also really important here. The long list literature exam is 2¼ hours, so students really do need to be able to sustain their writing and their concentration for long periods of time. Finally, I wouldn't be an English teacher if I wasn't encouraging students to read, and reading forms a really good part of our preparation for English exams. In English language, students have to read independently extracts from both fiction and non-fiction texts. Now, the texts are real published texts, they are generally aimed at a more adult audience, and so students have got to be confident and familiar with the conventions and the styles of those different texts. So reading for 10 to 20 minutes as part of their revision sessions is a really effective use of the time. The more students read, the more confident they will be with going into an exam and independently understanding a text. As part of the literature exam, students also have an unseen poetry assessment, where they'll have to read and respond to a poem that they haven't been taught. Again, encouraging students to dip in and out of poetry, there are some really good websites on there, and there are poems in anthologies and collections across school. Reading poetry, making sure they're familiar with poetry, and realising that poetry is just another form of language is really important to help them to be successful. So the 3 top tips: students need to be familiar with all the different question formats that they will come across in their different papers. They need to be really familiar with all their literature content for all their different texts. And they need to be familiar with the high-level vocabulary that they'll need to be able to express their ideas clearly and precisely.
Science revision can be done in a really ordered way that can help students to be able to approach the large volume of content that they will need to learn. Every child has been issued with checklists for each of their modules. It's really advisable for them to make revision cards for each module, preferably with a question on one side and the answer on the reverse. And we'll go through later in the presentation about how to use those flashcards most effectively. Once those flashcards have been made and learned, it's then about using the exam questions that the students have been issued with in order to see how well they've learned the content. If students follow this process for the modules that they need to across biology, chemistry and physics, it will be a really effective method of revision. Over the Easter holidays, all students will be set Seneca Home Learning for revision, and they will receive packs of science past papers for them to complete as well. All of this work has been set on Bromcom for students to be able to access. Lots of students will say at certain points that revising for maths isn't possible, but that is not true. All students need to revise. The exam dates are there. Regardless of whether or not they're doing higher or foundation paper, the exams are on the same day. There are 3 types of questions in maths. Basic, straightforward questions, they test students' maths knowledge. The AO2 questions, students are required to select maths to be able to solve real-life problems. And then the 3rd type of questions are where students need to explain how they have come to their answer. Students tend to do really well on the first type of questions, but the questions for AO2 and AO3 are the ones that they really need practice on. Every lesson in maths starts with a do it now, and that is reviewing content from the whole of the scheme of learning that they've been taught. Then there'll be specific lessons for revision for particular topics, focusing on a small aspect, key points, formula notes, and then exam questions. Every week as well in college, students will be completing past papers and getting feedback on those past papers. At home, they should use their responsive feedback sheets to revise the red and amber topics. These are personalised towards your child's most recent outcomes in their PPEs and should really help them to direct their revision onto topics that they don't yet know, rather than spending their time revising topics that they already have learned. Maths Genie is an excellent online revision guide. There isn't any login required. Just click on the link and students will be able to find grade-specific revision for every single topic in the maths papers. This will help them to target those red areas on their feedback sheets so they are doing work to fill in gaps in their knowledge. There is also videos on Maths Genie to explain how to do different aspects. So if a child you realise is struggling to answer some exam questions, it's advisable to get them to stop, go to Maths Genie, look at the video and then do some additional practice on that particular element, rather than ploughing through a maths past paper which they might not be able to access. Maths Genie also has hundreds and hundreds of exam questions that students can use, again to practice those specific topics. Students also have access to Spark's independent learning. Username and password are the same as it was in Year 10, and it's a really good system to use if you want to particularly practice a specific topic. Students will be familiar on how to use the Sparks Maths, but they might need to be reminded that they need to work on those red areas from their most recent assessments so that they are using their time most effectively to challenge themselves to learn the things they haven't yet grasped. Corbett Maths is another excellent online platform which has a very similar design to Maths Genie in the sense that you can watch videos, get an explanation, but this also has got a countdown which can be started. We are now much closer than 100 days to go to the GCSE exams, but your child could start from wherever on the Corbett Maths website and they'd get a topic a day to revise and review for maths. That's a really good use of their time, either in the Easter holidays or as they come up towards their maths exams. Home learning will still be set in maths, which is complementing the in-college revision, and that looks slightly different depending on the class your child is in. This can count towards their revision total for that particular subject area, and so they should be thinking to themselves that that is really an important part of their whole approach to revision, completing that set home learning so they know exactly where they are targeting. One other thing that we can do with our children at home is to keep practicing maths in other subjects and everyday life, asking your children to scale up recipes or to talk about how they're increasing, how they could increase their pocket money by an amount, a percentage, looking at interest rates and bank accounts if your child's doing higher tier maths, and so on and so forth, can be really good and useful examples, because there will be examples in the children's GCSE maths papers of everyday life where maths is being used. Your child has been taught how to annotate their formula sheet so that they go into their exam and do this as the first thing, helping them to be able to remember how to use those particular formulas. So they could do this from memory a couple of times a week, and that would really help them to be able to access it during the exam. Part 2 of this session is to outline the advice and guidance that's been given to students on looking after their mental health and well-being in the run-up to exams, and what techniques we have taught them in order to be able to revise effectively, and how we suggest that they might go about their revision planning. In the importance of wellbeing sessions, we have shared with students tips on how to develop tools to ensure that they are looking after their mental health and wellbeing. We've practiced grounding techniques with students that they might want to use if they're feeling overwhelmed, such as square breathing and going through the senses. Techniques for preparation on exam days, tips for coping on how to move on after one exam and before the next, and tips for managing the use of social media and gaming during times when students are meant to be revising. If you've not heard of square breathing or going through the senses before, or other grounding techniques, the website Young Minds, as well as others, have got really good links to where you can find information on those particular techniques. Some apps are now on the screen that are designed to help reduce screen time or focus activities. All of these suggest that they can help students to set out times when their phone is offline, and therefore might be a useful tool in helping them to focus revision. This slide is also in the booklet of information that you might find useful with regards to helping your child to prepare for their exam time. What we know is that students need to find a balance between what they enjoy doing and making enough time to do the revision that they require. Stay in touch with friends. One really important element of being able to cope with the additional pressure of exams and ensure it doesn't turn into stress is to be organised and plan that revision. It can help students to separate where they rest and where they revise, so they're not always feeling that their work is on top of them when they are in a particular area of the house. and also to set up joint study sessions, again in balance with doing that individual work that they need to do. There is a list of websites that can help with planning and preparation also in the booklet. Students can create revision timetables weekly for those weeks where they're at school and daily for periods of time such as the upcoming Easter holidays and May half term. Students have been given examples of these during their revision sessions, and what we've emphasised with the students is that planning is a vital part of being organised and reducing the inevitable pressure that they are going to feel. Students need to plan to revisit topics during their revision and not just cover something once. This will help them to be able to commit that knowledge to their long-term memory. Students might find it useful to track how long they're spending on revising each subject so that they can plan to cover everything that they need to plan. Some studies suggest that students covering 15 to 30 hours of revision per subject will help them to be successful. This will be different for different students and different subjects and will clearly be impacted by how much of the subject knowledge a student can already recall. One way that you can provide support in this is by getting involved in celebrating when students have achieved one of their revision goals. A simple tracker like the revision thermometers, which are on a page in your parent guide, coupled with motivational rewards, nothing fancy, maybe just a hot chocolate or a favourite snack, can really help students to get that motivation that they need to achieve their interim revision goals. There are apps for students if they want to do their revision planning electronically, and a couple of them are on the screen now with the links. Plenty more out there to be investigated, but be wary of those students who are spending a lot of time either creating pretty revision plans or spending their time inputting all their information into revision apps rather than doing the actual revision itself. Here are the steps that we've gone through with students about helping them to plan their revision effectively. We talked about making sure that they're filling in their extracurricular activities or work commitments or family commitments that they might already have. It's crucial that we support those activities to still continue to be able to have that time to enjoy whilst building around the revision programme that they are doing. Students need to list all their subjects. Be wary of students that start to say that they're not going to revise for a subject because they don't think they're going to do well in it. Try and encourage them that small amounts of revision for all their subjects will be much more beneficial and could really make a difference to their overall grade. Filling the timetable with subjects from their lists and then making sure that they're splitting that up into suitable topics and units and suitable time slots. There's lots of evidence to suggest that setting out to do big blocks of revision is not as effective as doing short chunks, say 25 minutes, and having a 5-minute break. It's important for the students to remember that the Easter and May half term are for building in some rest, but also a great opportunity to do some significant periods of revision that will enable them to get ahead before their exam starts. What you will notice from the timetable that's in the parent guide and from the timetable of exams that your child has received this week, they will be starting exams if they study subjects like French or Spanish, art and design or photography, or food and nutrition right from the beginning of the summer term in the week commencing the 29th of April, and therefore it's really important that they are aware that their lessons and their revision time might be disrupted by having those exams then. So we went through the evidence behind chunking with students, chunking that revision down into smaller, more manageable content, and ensuring that they have something as a break in between each of those chunks. We went through goal setting with students, getting them to think about what they want to achieve over a period of time, not just saying they're going to revise a whole topic or a whole subject, but breaking it down and ensuring that they can celebrate when they get to that point. We talked with students about overcoming the forgetting curve, putting spaced practice into their revision, repeating revision for different topics at optimum intervals after 1 day, 1 week or sooner in order to ensure that that learning is embedded into their long-term memory. And we also talk with students about how important it is that they are ensuring they're getting adequate amounts of sleep, adequate and really beneficial nutrition, especially on days when they've got exams, remembering to bring a clear plastic water bottle with them so that they can take that into their exam with them. We've already talked about the balance between working, revising, having after school activities and ensuring that they're getting some relaxation. And helping them to set achievable short-term and long-term goals. One of the most important things that we as a school and you as parents can do over the next few weeks for students is listen to them, ensure that if they've got any concerns that we listen and really can help them to either deal with those concerns or provide support to them if they feel they can't deal with them themselves. If you feel that you need some support in helping your child through this period, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. Here is a list of things that we're doing in college to help students to be able to prepare most effectively for their exams. I would encourage you to ask your child to go through their Bromcom home learning setting for over the Easter holidays, because lots of revision activities have been set by different subjects on there, and that's where you can find the subject specific advice and guidance that students will need to follow. I'm just going to cover with you now a couple of the most effective revision techniques that we have gone through with the students. We've taught the students those highlighted by the Education Endowment Foundation as having the most impact. The slides cover cumulative quizzing, flashcards and blind mind mapping, and I'm going to exemplify flashcards as one of the techniques because that's the technique that you as a parent can get involved with most helpfully with your child. If you know the most effective way of doing this, you'll be able to support your child with the maximum effect. So with the students, we felt that it's really important to go through the rationale with the children as to why these are most effective. It helps them to understand that by picking these techniques, they are using the most effective techniques, and therefore they should be feeling that they are actively engaged in the most effective revision strategies. So the most effective way to use flashcards is for the students to create the cards, question on one side, answer on the back, and number the cards. It's really important for the students to create the cards because that involves transcription, the turning of information from one type into another, which can really help to start to embed things in students' memory. Running through the cards, testing themselves is what the students can do, but this is also where you can come in to help them. You can get involved in the testing part. You don't need to know any of the answers because they're written on the cards themselves. In order to maximise the strengthening of memory, there are some techniques which the students should use. Shuffle the cards so that they are not in the order that they were written can really help to provide some additional challenge in terms of forming memories. Removing the cards that the students already know and then putting them back in after a few days or weeks to ensure that that knowledge is really secure and hasn't been lost over the time period between the last testing. And again, by having a really good set of comprehensive revision cards, it enables that spaced practice to be done much more easily than if the student has to make those notes again. Some questions that have come up from Year 11 over the course of the last half term is, firstly, when will they be allowed on study leave? Students learn best when they have subject specialists teaching them, and so we'll be teaching Year 11 right throughout the exam series to maximise their opportunities for support. After the Easter holidays, students will receive a full programme of when revision sessions are on, which is when they will absolutely be expected to be in school and when they are allowed to be at home. Students have received an overall timetable and highlighted that they received that at the beginning of March. This week, the week commencing the 25th of March, they've also received their own timetable, just with the dates of their own exams on it. In the week commencing the 22nd of April, students will receive their own personalised exam timetables with their seating arrangements and all of their access arrangements on it. They need to check that carefully, and if they've got any questions about that, they need to see Mrs. Good, who is the exams officer at school. From now on, we're asking students to hand in their mobile phones when they at the start of their exam. And we've been doing this during their PPEs as well. This is because we want to support students to not be disqualified from their exams. If a student is found to be in possession of a mobile phone, even if it doesn't go off, they will be disqualified from that unit or potentially from the whole subject. So we are putting measures in place to prevent this from happening to students. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation. If you have any questions at all, please email myself, Sarah Stead, Kelly Ray, the Assistant Principal who oversees Year 11, or Fiona Lee, the Year 11 Inclusion Lead. Thank you.